What's happening, YouTube? My name's Immortal Coil, and today we're talking Star Trek.
1964. Gene Roddenberry proposes to NBC an idea for a new series, a wagon train to the stars, space cowboys on epic adventures in the final frontier. The idea of space battles and starships was very entertaining to NBC, who ordered a pilot, but Gene Roddenberry secretly wanted to show what a united humanity could do in outer space and bring philosophical messages and commentary back home to a 60s TV audience. His pilot, The Cage, starred Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike, Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock, the science officer, and Majel Barrett as Number One, the first officer. In the pilot, the crew of the Enterprise responds to a distress signal coming from Talos 4. A group of humans apparently had been stranded on the planet, and as this is a early deep space voyage by the United Federation of Planets, it's Starfleet, they were one of the first faster-than-light vessels to be able to respond to the signal. They beam down to the planet and find a group of elderly humans as well as a young human female. In the event of rendering aid, Captain Pike and the human female disappear from the view of the other away team party members. What we find out eventually is that the inhabitants of the planet have incredible mental powers and can create illusions and induce feelings within the perceptions of other races. Fairly entertaining ideas, but NBC hated it. They told Roddenberry it was too cerebral, and that the alien officer looked too satanic, and that nobody would take a female executive officer seriously. Well, that might have been the case at the time. Undaunted, Roddenberry created a second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, starring William Shatner as James T. Kirk. Mr. Spock was changed into the first officer role, kind of blending elements of Number One with his previous role. And the show went on for 3 seasons, famously being canceled and kept alive by its fan base. What about that original pilot? Well, it was reworked into a show, a 2-parter called The Menagerie. And then elements of that pilot were mined for inclusion in Star Trek: The Next Generation. To say that Star Trek was ahead of its time is an understatement. And although the audiences of the 60s might have had the problems that the network came up with, a new iteration called Star Trek: Strange New Worlds will resurrect the first captain of the Enterprise. Starring Anson Mount, Rebecca Romijn, and Ethan Peck, this series will be shown on CBS All Access and takes place in the same J.J. sandbox as Star Trek Discovery and all the Star Trek movies. Will it be good? The idea would work if they told Star Trek stories just using these characters. We've gotten used to a couple of different starship crews and classes of starships. Now, the Constitution class Enterprise is legendary, so much so that when NASA was gearing up for the space shuttle program, thousands of people wrote in and demanded that the shuttle be named Enterprise, which Roddenberry and the original cast of Star Trek were present for. Done right and told thoughtfully, the show has a lot of potential. But if it's being heralded under the Alex Kurtzman banner, well, we know what to expect from that, don't we? Much like Star Wars and Doctor Who, Star Trek is being used as a vehicle to push social agenda. And the idea is that women are superior to men in decision-making and in action sequences. Star Trek Discovery was very famous for introducing the Mary Sue-like Michael Burnham, which we in the fandom menace call Mikey Spock. Not only that, she taught Spock how to Spock, who was kind of an autistic, bearded Vulcan. Mikey Spock was the favorite daughter of Sarek. And sometime after the events of Star Trek Discovery, Spock finally got his head screwed on straight and was able to serve as the science officer, the capacity that Strange New Worlds is likely to explore. Now, Rebecca Romijn is an interesting choice. She's probably most famous as Mystique from the X-Men franchise of the late 90s and early 2000s. She's still very much gorgeous, but in a role like Number One, which calls for a sharp mind combined with physical beauty. The potential is there for something cool to happen. Not quite so sure about the Spock actor. I'd have to see him with better writing. But when you listen to Fandom Menace channels like Overlord DVD, Nerdrotics, and Mecharandom 42, we know that Alex Kurtzman's stock in CBS is very, very low, and that investors and advertisers have threatened to pull out of their Star Trek projects many, many times because of the response to the content of the shows that they're producing. Discovery was terrible. It went way over budget, told too little story, and had a terrible conclusion. Star Trek Picard recently finished its first season, and the changes that they're making in it bring us a version of Jean-Luc Picard that is very, very different from the one that we received in the late 80s and early 90s. Now, according to what we know, CBS is licensing its right to use the Star Trek name and ships and logos and all that kind of stuff, with the caveat that it has to be 25% different from what came before. This is why if you watch the first Star Trek movie with Chris Pine, you see that Spock's time travel event created a whole new universe. And all this shit, all this Kurtzman and J.J. Abrams shit is taking place on a different timeline than what I like to call prime Star Trek. So there still is hope out there, but as long as they're pumping out Star Trek product under the J.J. Kurtzman banner, we're not going to get anything that's similar to what we remember growing up with. Now, we talk about Star Wars a lot because it's the most popular film franchise ever. But Star Trek actually formed very core components of my personality, my outlook on life, and what I believe human beings are capable of. It helped foster an open-mindedness to breeding extraterrestrials, not as aliens, space aliens, but as people who just happen to have been born around a different star and is curious to just say hi. Make friends. Can Star Trek do this? I haven't seen them do it. What I've seen is that they've taken Gene Roddenberry's optimism, his vision for the future, and completely replaced it with present-day nihilism, where the writers are attempting to put their political beliefs into Star Trek. And they think that we're under a terrible tyranny that needs to be extricated at any cost. Well, that's not the point of Roddenberry's vision. Roddenberry's vision is that we grew past the need for tyrannical government. We invented free energy machines that took care of food, eliminated the need for money and any sort of human infrastructure and power archetypes based on the acquisition of things. Because if you can press a button and get whatever you want, you don't need to go to work. You don't need to stand on the backs of other people. You don't need to exploit. You don't need to be a slave to someone else in order to simply exist. With all of our needs taken care of, that Maslow hierarchy of needs, we're all suddenly capable of self-actualization. And the point of life becomes not out-competing and accumulating more shit. It becomes, how good a person can you be, and how well can you represent planet Earth and the stars. That's what Star Trek is. Give me that, CBS. Give me that, and we may all just achieve :
So, there you have it. My thoughts on the possible Star Trek spinoff on CBS All Access. My name's Immortal Coil. Like, share, subscribe, drop me a comment. Let me know what you want to see covered on future editions of Savage Spirituality. Check out my brothers and sisters in the Fandom Menace. We're a group of channels dedicated to purity and storytelling and the preservation of our modern mythology. Together, you and I can turn around the shit show that constitutes entertainment in 2020. And remember, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Kapla! Fascinating.